Okay, I just filmed this video like 2 hours ago, and then I realized that the microphone that was on top of my camera wasn't working, so we have to use this instead from now on. And I filmed a video that I thought was perfect, and now I need to do it all over again, and I usually don't script them, so I need to do everything again. So I'm sorry about the rants here at the beginning, but what I wanted to talk about today is the gaslighting, corruption, and a bit of like manipulation that happens, especially in the spiritual community and mental health community, like mainstream, let's say, spiritual and mental health, you know? Because what I've realized over time, I feel like when you go through like your spiritual awakening, you start reading books, you start to get into law of attraction and all these things, I feel like we both kind of like go through very similar stages, and some people maybe get to a certain point earlier than others. But I think I've been in this place a few times, and I've gotten out of this place a few times where like I believe that there's moments when if you fully believe into like spirituality and all these things, you also start believing the whole like you create what you are, everything bad happening to you is something that you created, that's like your fault, yada yada. And the problem with that is that I know that physical reality is supposed to be a mirror to your internal reality. I'm not saying that's not true, but I also sometimes wonder to which extent it is true and to which extent it is actually a good thing to believe that. And let me explain that in the sense of like, I can imagine that the rest, like everything that I see in front of me, is a mirror to myself. But at the same time, I also feel like that, like believing this to like an extreme, has also made me in certain situations let people abuse me and not set boundaries and limits and all of these things. Because I thought like, well, the fact that this is happening to me means that I deserve it or that I manifested it, so like I don't deserve to be treated better or something like that, when I feel like that's not true. And that's very invalidating, sorry. And it's a way to kind of like self-gaslight you. So I feel like in my case, for example, I come from a family with like narcissistic parents, which means I've been gaslit my whole life. And I think that also leads certain people to continue gaslighting themselves, and I feel like I've done that for a while. Not just myself, but also others. Like, for example, my younger sister, she has depression, and there's been times where I've been like, well, maybe you're causing your own depression because, like, you know, you can change your reality with this and this and that. And I feel like that's very damaging to say to someone who is dealing with that, because it's not helpful. It could be that it's, like, I mean, we don't really have proof that spirituality works the way that it's supposed to work, or what we know or what we've read in books. But I feel like even if you believe those things, I feel like it's not really helpful to believe them to an extreme, if you know what I mean. Because I feel like if you, for example, like there's like different also levels of privilege that each of us has. I am a white woman who comes from like a good family, who went to like private school, had really good education, and I have a lot of privilege compared to a lot of other people. And I think that if I come here on YouTube and I explain certain things and I tell you, oh no, but you should just, I don't know, feel safe to manifest this or do that because life is so easy. Of course, because from my point of view, life is easy in certain aspects. There's going to be other aspects where it's not, but I feel like maybe you're a person of color who comes from like a very poor background, who didn't have access to education and everything. And if you try to compare yourself to me, you're going to get so frustrated and you're going to get so discouraged maybe, or you're gonna even gaslight yourself more because you're like, oh, this girl has this, why can I not have this? And I'm not saying you can't. I'm never saying that you can, because I feel like we've seen cases of people who come from like the worst possible backgrounds getting there and creating success and creating abundance and creating all these amazing things for themselves. But I also feel like there always has to be this level of self-awareness, to be like, okay, I need to be aware of like the challenges that I have as a person. Like maybe being a woman can be something that limits you a little bit, maybe having no access to this education, this and this and that, just for you to kind of like take it easy on yourself. Not to like limit yourself, but to take it easy on yourself. Because I've also seen other people who, coming from same background as me, same education, same school, same everything, they've achieved crazy amazing things a long time ago, and I've been trying to like manifest the same things, and it has taken me maybe like 6 years, 7 years to do those things. And it's because like I went through like a crazy amount of trauma that maybe the person next to me didn't. So I had that to face with myself, and I had that to heal and work through and everything. And for a long time I used to see all these videos of like certain people on the internet being like, oh, I manifested like $5,000 in 24 hours or things like that. And you need to be aware of like maybe that person didn't go through your trauma. Maybe that person never experienced poverty in the first place, because you know that usually like there's a lot of, I don't know, rich kids like who had like rich parents, like who grew up rich, who like automatically have a certain abundance mindset that they don't even have to think about it because it's ingrained in them. They didn't go through like money trauma, they didn't go through like any of that. So I feel like in the spiritual field, I see so many people maybe not doing it consciously, but kind of taking advantage of other people, or kind of like pushing their views on them and gaslighting them. And that can be very damaging. And this is just a video kind of reminder for anyone who consumes spiritual content to kind of like always look inward. Don't listen to what anyone around you says, not even me, if it doesn't feel good to you. Because I've seen like, I went this one time to like an energy reader. Like it's a girl who does like massages, and like she did tarot, she did a lot of like different things in like an hour of therapy. Well, it wasn't therapy session, but kind of. And one thing that she said was like, well, I'm seeing that in your family lineage there's been like a lot of abundance, money problems. This comes from like your dad and your grandpa's side because they lost things and karma and whatever from the past. And I'm glad that at that point I wasn't like super deep into it, but I feel like I've been at moments where like if someone told me things like that, I would just have believed them and feel like, oh my god, if I'm having this money problem, it's probably because of this karma and this and this and that, and maybe I would feel bad about myself, or I would like feel resentment towards my dad because I'm like, oh my god, this is like my dad's problem because it comes from like that lineage and he never solved it, and now I'm the one who needs to solve this like generational thing. So I feel like sometimes I've seen also like in different like conferences that I've seen on YouTube where like people maybe go up the stage and ask certain spiritual gurus questions. They're like, oh, I see that there's like this karma in your family and this is the reason why you cannot accomplish things. And I feel like maybe these gurus like don't really help other people, they just make it worse. Because like if you start going through a spiritual path, I think it's mostly because like you're looking for answers. And if you're looking for answers, one thing that I've seen that we have in common, like all the spiritual people that I've met, is that we have very similar paths. Like we went through certain traumatic events, and that's what usually led us to spirituality, because we were looking for answers and things like that. But sometimes we end up, maybe like we grew up with narcissistic parents, we end up with narcissistic gurus that teach us the same shit, or like gaslight us the same way, you know, and teach us to gaslight us, being like, no, because you need to do this thing, because if you don't do this thing, then karma's gonna get you, and then this and this and that. And I've realized that I've been in moments where like I was very vulnerable, and those kind of advices didn't really help me at all. And from the beginning, I think that since I wasn't really fully aware of who I was, and I wasn't really confident in myself, because when people gaslight you your whole life, you start to question like who am I, who actually am I, and who is like the version of my parents that they projected on me. And you need to spend a lot of time on yourself, on kind of like strengthening that inner like connection with yourself, because I feel like that's the most important thing. Because you can always listen to people outside of you, because I feel like there's obviously people outside of you who have more knowledge than you have. But it's important to have a good, like strong like connection and bond with yourself, because then you're gonna listen to people, and if it doesn't align with you, you're gonna be like, this advice sounds amazing, but it doesn't feel right to me. So if it doesn't feel right to me, maybe this is not the path that I need to go, you know? Because some people can come and be like, I don't know, relationships should be this way, or relationships should be the other way. For example, Teal's one, there's this documentary that came out on her recently. I haven't seen it yet, but I heard really bad things about like how she's a narcissist and this and that. I haven't seen it yet, but I've always had this problem with her, that there's certain advices that she says and that she preaches that I feel like are very on point for me and that have helped me a lot. But then there's other ways that I see her talking, and I see her talking with like this moral superiority, where I feel like you're kind of saying that this is black or white, has to be this way, and that's the only way you see it, and that there's no other way to see it. And I don't think that's true, or that doesn't really resonate with me, or that doesn't really feel right with me. It just feels like weird, and I don't know. Like the latest videos that she's been filming about like relationships, and there was this one video I remember about like compatibility in relationships, where she said something about like, no, because if this person wants this thing and this person wants this other thing, then you're just like like playing a losing game or something like that, because it's never gonna work. And it's like, well, you're completely avoiding the whole topic on like compromise, on people being emotionally vulnerable and emotionally available, and kind of like maturing and all of these things, which I feel like, I mean, sometimes like spiritual people don't really take into account that psychology plays a big like role in all of this, and they just discard everything, and they're just like, no, this is like this way, and if you attract this person who is like emotionally, like, this is something that I actually used to do to myself. I would tell myself like, well, you attracted someone who's like emotionally unavailable, so you must be as well. And I'm not saying to like not think that, because I feel like to an extent I was right, and to an extent I was also emotionally unavailable, and this is something that I continue to work on. But it also doesn't mean that I need to, or I should allow people to treat me in a certain way, you know, because at the end of the day, you need to learn to set boundaries. And you can, for example, be emotionally unavailable to an extent, let's say, or maybe not, maybe you're not. And then you meet someone who you really like and you want to be with them, and they start breadcrumbing you, treating you in like not a nice way or something. You are allowed to set boundaries. You're allowed to tell this person like, hey, I don't like this. I'm going to set this boundary and then see what happens. Because I feel like at the end of the day, what I used to do sometimes is think that since I manifested my reality, I couldn't really like act on anything. I just needed to like let things happen and let the other person take the lead in like jobs and relationships with my parents. And at the end of the day, it has to be a balance. It has to be a balance of like you setting boundaries and you manifesting, but always like not gaslighting yourself, always validating how you feel, and not telling yourself like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. Like if I'm feeling, for example, let's say you feel, this is something that I've dealt with for a long time. And it's the fact that I'm a bit of a jealous person, okay? Not to a toxic extent, but sometimes it can get to a toxic extent. And something that I realized is that for a long time with my boyfriend, I would get jealous, and I would get really jealous over time. And I was like, I didn't used to get this jealous. Like, why is this happening, you know? And I started to kind of like go back and look at certain things that he had done. And I was like, okay, this behavior of him is taking my jealousy and bringing it to a very toxic level. And this is not just a me thing. I mean, it's a me thing because I need to set a boundary there of like, hey, don't do these things, because these things make me insecure and make me not feel safe. And at the same time, it's also like, in Spanish we have a word for this, I don't know what the word for it in English is, of like being responsible with your, it's kind of like affectionate responsibility or something. In Spanish psychology, I don't know what the word is, but like basically that the other person is also responsible for part of the relationship, you know what I mean? So I feel like the whole like spiritual side of this, like when you talk about relationships, or like, I don't know, the awakened feminine, the awakened masculine, all of these things, sometimes people really, what they do is like they blame you. They try to blame you to also probably sell you something, get you to watch their videos or things like that. And that's not nice, and that's not good. So always this is just kind of like a little reminder of like, be aware of like how certain content creators on like the spiritual field talk, and even mental health field, because even mental health professionals, like, I don't know, the holistic psychologist, I really liked her advice. And I feel like I've learned a lot from her, but I'm also like from a similar background of like, I'm a white woman who has like had a very easy life compared to other people, and it can be very invalidating for people who didn't have the same background. So always kind of like, don't try to compare yourself to me in the sense of like, oh, she's this age and she accomplished all these things already, why am I not there, I'm not manifesting correctly. Because at the end of the day, you're just like hitting yourself, you're just punishing yourself over and over again, and that's not what you need to do. You need to take it easy on yourself, you need to be kind to yourself, you need to be nice to yourself. And I know that's something, it's not the easiest way, but I used to be very hard on myself for a long time, because I compared myself to all these other people, and I'm like, well, then I met them, and then I realized they had like the most basic way of thinking, because I feel like those people were like not really deep thinkers, because they never had anything remotely traumatic happen to them. Like they maybe had like small little things, but I went through crazy things in comparison to them. And I'm like, wow, it makes sense that this person accomplished all these things, because like I had to kind of like grow up after I was 21, because before 21, from what my therapist told me, is like I didn't have a personality because my parents never allowed me to develop one. So it's like I'm kind of late in life, if you want to see it that way, but that's not a bad thing. It's just my journey, and that's it. So basically what I want to say with this video is that whenever you're listening to anyone give you any type of spiritual advice, always see how it makes you feel inside and trust that. Because even though maybe 90% of people say like, oh, I don't know, let's say that polyamory is the right thing to do. If you're a monogamous person and you want to continue to be a monogamous person, that is completely fine. Or if it's the other way around, who cares? The important thing is that you feel good and that you honor how you feel, because at the end of the day, you are a spiritual being living a human existence. And being in a human body means that you have an ego, and having an ego is not a bad thing. I used to think that having an ego was actually like the worst, and like you had to like experience ego death. And I mean, I did ayahuasca, so I actually need to make a video on that at some point. But I did ayahuasca, and what that taught me was that the ego is there for a reason. The ego is there to kind of like make you live this like individual experience in this collective place that we live, you know? So basically, what I want to tell you is that any good teacher, any good spiritual like guru, whatever you want to call it, will always encourage you to look inside and will never try to force their ideals on you. Because I feel like I've actually been there. I've actually been the person who was like, I went to like normal ego to spiritual ego, because I feel like that's something that we all do at some point, where we start seeing the spiritual things, we start like learning all these things, and then we're like, oh, I'm better than anyone because like I'm a spiritual person, and anyone who isn't spiritual isn't good. And that's not true. That's just spiritual ego, which is not a bad thing either. It's just like part of the process, because I feel like everyone I know has gone through that process. But what I've learned in the end is that everyone has their own experience, and there's nothing that's better or worse. There's not like a one truth in this world. There's just like a lot of different truths, and all of them can actually like live with each other, and there's nothing wrong with that. But always, like, whenever you're listening to someone, see how they make you feel, see if their advice makes you feel safe, because if it doesn't, maybe it's not the right advice for you. Maybe some advices that one person gives you are right for you, and maybe some others aren't. But you need to always remember that every person is very unique and individual, and I feel like your path is going to be unique and individual, and not everything is going to apply to you, and you don't need to compare yourself to anybody else, and you just need to kind of like see what fits for you. And I know it's hard, because if you come from like a complicated background like I do, you probably doubt yourself really much. So like the best thing that you can do is invest time into like spending time by yourself, learning to trust yourself again, learning to not doubt yourself. And I can maybe make a video on that. I don't know how I would even explain that, but I can do a video on that, no problem. So yeah, just always look for teachers that make you even doubt their own advice, like me. Like if I'm saying, well, that sounds counterintuitive to what I just said, but I just want to say that don't listen to my advice if it doesn't feel good to you. Just do it if something feels good to you, you know what I mean? And just do the same thing with others. Just like look for people who maybe are more open and more of like, hey, it's like with Buddhism. I don't know, I mean, I haven't read a lot of Buddhism, but I feel like that's a religion. It's not technically a religion, but you know what I mean. It's the only religion that ever felt good to me, because it was always this person being like, hey, I'm just a guy who's telling you all of this, but just believe whatever you want. And I feel like the moment a religion starts being like, no, God says that this is right and this is wrong, then it's toxic, then it's maybe not helpful for you. And a lot of gurus do this, a lot of spiritual people, a lot of like mental health practitioners say like, oh no, since from this side of psychology, this is wrong and this is right. And no, there's nuances, and not everything is black and white. Things are pretty much always like in different gray areas. So I hope you liked this video. I hope it was helpful for some of you, for all of you. And if you want to suggest any other topics that I do, always do that in the comments, please. I'm very happy to like see what you want me to talk about next. Give it a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week.